Swimming like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. We come to you virtually from Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. If you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here is the podcast for you. It's where we say street smarts and book smarts collide, and collide takes on a new meaning today. You'll see why. I'm Dan Whedon, and my co-host today is the incomparable Michelle Baumberger. Our guest is Chris Cazares with Polaris Injury Law. Chris Cazares and Polaris Injury Law are advocates who dedicate their lives to helping you get back to yours. Enduring a personal injury is a traumatic experience, and navigating the claims process is stressful, overwhelming, and confusing. Even a routine fender bender can raise perplexing insurance and legal issues. Chris and his team represent people who have been harmed, and we are eager to learn more about him and his tremendous practice. Chris, welcome. We will be with you in just a few minutes. Everyone, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube. I like to say we are ubiquitous. It's my favorite word. We come to you from about a dozen cities, including the mothership in Atlanta, Boston, and Boca Raton, Charleston, and a whole bunch of new places. Now, before we bring on Chris, the incomparable Michelle Baumberger is here. Hello, Michelle.
Hey, Dan. Good to see you.
Good to see you. We are literally on the doorstep of Thanksgiving. Are you and your family prepared?
Yeah, Thanksgiving's my favorite meal of the year. I love Thanksgiving.
Okay, then I've got to ask, out of everything, are you a traditional Thanksgiving family?
Fairly traditional. The vegetarian's out of town at college, so we don't have to worry about like the whole, like, what do we replace turkey with? But yeah, turkey, stuffing, potatoes. We've gone the Brussels sprouts route rather than broccoli or something. So that's a little bit unusual, I think.
So listen, plead the fifth. Michelle, I'm going to make you plead the fifth on this. You can only eat one of everything that you said. Only one and only one. Plead the fifth. What are you eating? You know, the dead air is terrible radio. I really got Michelle thinking.
Savory or sweet, right? If it's only one thing, it's sweet.
You only get one thing.
Sweet potato cheesecake.
Oh, sweet potato. I don't know if I've ever had sweet potato cheesecake.
It is lovely with maple syrup and cream cheese and ginger snap crust. It is perfect.
It seems like you may have gotten the whole savory and sweet all in one fell swoop.
I don't know about that, but anyway, that's where I would go if you had to pick one forever.
All right, so now we got to bring on Chris. Chris, well, first of all, welcome to the podcast. We're going to start you out because I've got two attorneys with me today. I feel like plead the fifth is going to be an ongoing opportunity. But look, before we dive into you and your great practice, Thanksgiving at your home, do you do all the traditional things?
Dan, yes, we do.
All right. Okay, see, and here it is. He's only telling me the minimal. I think I'm going to have to do my best to pull more out. Chris, plead the fifth. You only get one thing to eat. One thing and one thing only. Which one is it?
Mashed potatoes.
Mashed potatoes. I like that. I would go stuffing. The stuffing would probably be where I went on that. So listen, but enough about eating. It's making me hungry. Chris, welcome to the show. I'm eager to hear more about what you do. I've perused your website, and it really looks like a great business. Tell everybody about Polaris. I hope I'm saying that right. Polaris, right? Polaris Injury Law. How did you get into it? And talk to us a little bit about your firm.
Dan, you nailed it. It is in fact Polaris Injury Law. I took the roundabout way to personal injury, and frankly, if it would have been my first area of law, it wouldn't have gone well for me. I started off in the military. I served and am still serving in the United States Air Force, the JAG Corps. So I did a lot of criminal defense. I was a prosecutor. I was a criminal defense attorney. And after a while, I met my wife. Then everything changes, right? Military practice is a worldwide practice. So once you get married and you have kids, they expect you to actually be there. So, ding dong, I had to find a new area of practice. And personal injury was introduced to me by my law partner, Steve Lingenbrink, at Trial Lawyer, Trial Lawyer College. Jerry Spence had started this college up in Wyoming, a really great place. Personal injury lawyers, criminal defense attorneys meet each other. The next thing you know, I'm moving to the Pacific Northwest.
So you mentioned your wife, and not only is she your wife, but she's also involved in your business. So talk a little about how that came about.
Well, Devin always likes to one-up me. Whether it was when we were in the military, she had to make lieutenant colonel first. She likes to do everything better than me. So yes, I'm the attorney, but Devin served over 20 years as an Army nurse. So previously she has deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan. She triaged on the front lines. And what we have now is we have a nurse that actually looks at whatever medical situation is going on, and we make sure that our clients have somebody, a healthcare professional, that can understand how to navigate them through a very difficult process.
So go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm gonna just follow up there. So, being a lawyer, we're both in that same boat, but personal injury is sometimes looked at as ambulance chasers kind of role. So tell me a little bit about what, because I've heard your pitch. I know that the way that you look at your clients and your business is very different. And I'm wondering if you can just share a little about that why for your business that is unique, because I do think there is something there that I've never heard from the personal injury space before.
You bet. Well, I do love the phrase ambulance chaser, and here's why. The reality, there are people in our profession that do that. And, that's unfortunately the 5% get the majority of the headlines. And we just had somebody in here who had come from somebody that was very into ambulance chasing. They're like, oh, we got this bad vibe, XYZ. And when I listened to the story, you're like, wow, this was it was a whole thing in order for those folks to try and land this client. The point is, the majority of personal injury, what it really comes down to is, at least at our firm, we are trying to get our clients from injury to recovery. And every case is about two things. It's about insurance and it's about medical. In the insurance realm, people would like to believe that the other person, the at-fault driver, that their insurance is out there to help them. But, the spoiler alert is they're $1 billion revenue industry, not because they pay out claims. And the reality is that when somebody is stepping into that, and that's their one experience, that's all they've got. When you get a personal injury attorney to come by your side and explain the process to you and get you through that process, the job is always to take a problem off of your client's plate, put it onto your own, and to take care of them, their family, and their legal situation. In other words, we solve problems. And I guess the second part of that is, when we look at the insurance piece, that's a whole complex, can of worms that is very difficult. But I think medical can be equally difficult. I come from Texas, so we are like ground zero for tort reform. It started there. If you look up tort reform, that's where it started. Why am I saying that? I'm bringing it up because when I was coming of age and going to law school, it was Governor George Bush, about to be President George Bush. And I didn't know that insurance industries were contributors to people's political campaigns. Very naive. I had not started yet. But it was important for me to say that now, that I used to say, oh, these people on the back of buses, et cetera, et cetera. What I didn't know is that almost every client that we see, there's somebody's mom, there's somebody's brother. They're just people who didn't ask for this problem. And the phrase jackpot justice, I love when people say it, because it's an opportunity for me to educate. As attorneys, we have a responsibility to educate the entire population about what we actually do, because there's the headline, and then there's reality.
So in reality, I got so many questions now coming up. I'm hopefully going to try to remember them all. So Michelle, with your indulgence, I want to ask back-to-back questions really quickly off of what Michelle asked you. I think also there is I don't know if it's a misconception or a perception that personal injury comes out of auto accidents. And while that is absolutely true, I think we see it on commercials, right? That it's the auto accident. And looking at your website, there's way other ways to be injured. And you, I think, deal with all of them. Can you talk a little bit more about the type of injuries that you see outside of what the traditional auto insurance claim would be?
Thanks, Dan. Other types of injuries that we see are somebody who's injured in a crosswalk. We see dog bite cases where somebody is out on the beach, for instance, and a dog is off leash and mauls a person. That is another claim. We have a nursing home case where a client of ours passed away, we believe negligently, from the healthcare facility. A big one is 18-wheeler accidents where, and you all have seen so much of that. Anytime you get on I-5, an 18-wheeler collides into one of our clients through no fault of their own. But the phrases that you're going to hear that are important, it's like post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, and specifically PTSD. What I was trying to say earlier, and I apologize, almost every person that we come across is an underreporter. If you talk to them at the scene, they're like, everything's fine. It's not until a few days later when the adrenaline has worn off and they've taken accounting of themselves, that piece of it, and you talk to a family member, that's the big thing. When it comes to PTSD, nobody wants to believe that when they drive by the accident scene, the reason they're seizing up is because they're having another traumatic event, or why they're snapping at their wife or their kids. Oftentimes, if there's been a concussion and we believe that there's traumatic brain, we always talk to a family member. And that's the best advice you can give. Bottom line, when somebody's in an accident, they should never have to go it alone. That's the time that you need to reach out to your community. You need to reach out to professionals. And if necessary, and if you want a free consultation, that's why you bring in a personal injury lawyer.
So Michelle, thanks for that. Let me tag on to this, because this was good. Now I'm going to ask the original question I had until I thought of the other one. And it goes back to something Michelle asked, but it also goes back to when I was looking over your website. I had to do like a triple take, because under the picture of your lovely wife, it said nurse. And it says, I don't remember exactly what it said, nurse. It was like, am I reading this correctly? It's like you have a nurse on staff. I don't think I've ever, maybe I don't look enough, seen that in any place else. Is that unique to you? And talk a little bit more about what that offers to your clients.
As far as I know, we're the only personal injury firm in the greater King County area that has a nurse on staff. I haven't seen it otherwise. It is, obviously an anomaly. That's one more, that's one more piece of the overhead. But functionally speaking, when you see, it's just like everybody else. Like, this is the best description. You go to the doctor's office. Who do you talk to first? The nurse. The nurse is making sure that they're notating everything, making sure things are going in the right places. And it's no different here. Every intake that we have for a client is with Nurse Devin. Devin is a part of our intake, part of our from injury to recovery, because at the beginning of the injury, you may think you have one problem, and it can become a lot of problems. And nobody wants to feel like they can't talk to the folks that they've hired. And at least my personal experience is when I go to the doctor's office, sometimes I get frustrated. And the frustration comes from, I have a set amount of time. I have a lot of questions. Maybe I forgot something, or maybe something after the fact comes to mind. And that's not the space we're trying to operate in, Dan. Like, we're here to solve a problem. And if somebody has a shot at getting all of their health back, that means they need to see the medical professionals that are going to get them there, whether it's a physical therapist, whether it's a chiropractor, whether it's a physiatrist. Somebody needs to help our clients, and we want to get them there.
Yeah, like I said, it's such a different feel, different tone from what I've heard from others. That's one of the reasons that really struck me about building this unique business model. You mentioned something earlier about our job as lawyers to educate the public, because I do think that whether it's what I do on the business side, what you do on the injury side, everyone hears lawyer and they say, I've watched Law and Order, I know what you do, and there's nuance to that. But you mentioned recently that you are an active member of the Washington State Association for Justice. And I'm curious as to what that organization is and what your role is.
You bet. Washington State Association for Justice is a plaintiff organization. It's all attorneys, all plaintiffs, and it is a collection of all of these individuals across the state of Washington that actively practice. And the Washington State Association for Justice was one of the primary reasons, believe it or not, that I moved here. My law partner said, Chris, the Washington State Association of Justice, every state has an association for justice, but it is the apple of everybody's eye because we are so collective, and the efforts that leadership makes to make sure our community is aware of laws that are being passed. And then secondarily, the second piece that was really strong for me is when I went to get additional CLE information, continuing legal education, they make sure everybody's educated. So if I needed to plus up on an area of law, not only would they give me the material, I could ask the follow-up question. So anyways, after moving here, it's been all that and then some. Like Steve was 100% right about that. If you're a plaintiff's attorney and you're not in the WSAJ, make the call right now.
Well, I have to make a call right now, Chris, and it's to pay the bills. And we're going to do that by taking a short break. And when we take that short break to hear from today's Spotlight sponsor, and when we come back with our guest, Chris Cazares, for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to find out what Chris really, really thinks about. You're going to find out what my question is, because I don't want him to think about it. We're gonna make a little plead the fifth on Hot or Not. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. And the more of the Shrimp Tank is to talk about our wonderful title sponsor. The power of law is often used against those who don't know what they don't know, but not anymore. Equinox levels the field for entrepreneurs. Just as your business may now tap into a managed service provider for accounting, HR, IT help, you can now tap into the power of law with Equinox. Equinox's strategic legal counsel service gives your business the same strategic law advantages as the megacorps. But unlike the mega attorneys, Equinox brings a balance of strategic business and practical legal guidance. You set the priorities in the budget. The Equinox team builds a personalized plan at a fixed monthly cost to best serve your legal priorities and needs. Take on business complexities with the power of law on your team. Visit equinoxbusinesslaw.com. Schedule a complimentary, no obligation evaluation to see where your business stands. Level the playing field with Equinox Strategic Legal Counsel.
Thanks, Dan. Everyone, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Michelle Bomberger, and our guest today is Chris Cazares. From our next segment, Hot or Not.
Chris, this is where we pepper you with questions, Michelle and I just kind of feel like, because I'm here with two attorneys, that I'm a little bit like Perry Mason, and you are sitting answering questions. So I think we're going to be hot or not, but it may be a little bit more plead the fifth. Who knows? We're going to talk about business, about life, about heck, maybe even Thanksgiving, who knows? So I'm going to throw this one out at you. You brought it up a little bit earlier, but I'd like you to elaborate. Hot or not, Chris, insurance companies?
It's a great question. Insurance companies, well, everybody needs one. And the best advice I could give anybody is to understand the difference between an independent insurance broker and a captive insurance agent. So for instance, State Farm would be a captive insurance agent. In other words, they have their book of business. You're only going to talk to them. An independent insurance broker is somebody who can look across the spectrum and they can find something that perhaps suits your lifestyle or your assets for that matter.
So, and thank you know that is a really good thing to say. I really appreciate that. One of the things I'd like to have you elaborate on before we go to Michelle's hot or not, though, is the challenges that maybe you see in dealing with insurance companies on what would appear to be something that's straightforward. People trying to deal with insurance companies on their own. Maybe I should have said insurance claim DIY.
That's another great question. But I am going to start with, I'm going to not answer your question because I'm an attorney.
Okay.
The first thing, the hot part is, for the most part, Dan, everybody I've ever met, if they haven't looked at their insurance or had some insurance agent review their policy, they're underinsured. That's the reality. And people look, this is to answer your question, people look for the lowest rates. Well, if it's the lowest rate, but it's not doing its job, that's a problem. So what you're really looking for, so for instance, I had a client recently who said, we've been with XYZ insurance agency for over 20 years is what it was. And they've always paid out claims. And I was like, okay, well, what kind of claims were they? She's like, oh, well, the other driver was at fault. Well, now their daughter is been in a collision, not her fault. And it exhausted the other driver's insurance because it's such a serious injury. Now it's time for her insurance company to pay for the first time ever after 20 years, not paying. So here we are in a lawsuit and we're trying to make them make good on their promise. But bottom line, somebody gets hurt and they don't have enough insurance. It doesn't matter if it was their fault or not. If it doesn't cover the injury, a traumatic brain injury, if you're in the hospital even for a week and your policy was the minimum 25,000, that'll never you're never going to see that money. It's going to go straight to the hospital. So in other words, everybody should always have an insurance review, a policy review with a trusted agent, period.
All right, hot or not, working with your spouse.
It's the best thing that ever happened to me.
And you told us a little bit more about that. Is there anything specific about making it the best thing that's ever happened to you?
Michelle, this is being recorded. I'm not saying anything else. Just kidding. I know it's not for everybody. But the reality is but I don't learn the hard way, Michelle. I haven't learned. So I am on my second marriage. And when you meet Devin, you'll say, wow, how did somebody like Chris meet somebody like Devin? You're like, I believe in God. That's how you know in miracles. Like, it is an answered prayer. She is the most pleasant person to work with. She moves the ball forward every day. We recently had a coach, a business consultant, come into our office, and they did all of our different personalities. And you look at my personality and you look at hers, and you couldn't have asked for a better partner. But I will say this, it's close quarters. So if you, it's not for everybody, and it may on most days not be for Devin. You're only getting one side of the story. I love it. It works out really well for me. So I love it. It's hot.
So hot or not, social media marketing for attorneys.
Social media. So Dan, to not answer your question again, social media marketing is only as good as the education that you're providing your prospective clients. At the end of the day, we always need to add value to our clients. Something I do not like is fear of missing out or fear marketing, or I'm going to jackpot justice. You're going to get $1 million. Those are all things that are not relationship based. And my law partner, Steve, is a community-based lawyer, which means we get to know the community And we are primarily referral based. You won't see us on ads. And the reason for that is, we have to answer the conversation. If my friend Michelle refers to me a case, I'm going to see her next week. And she's going to want to know how everything's going. I may or may not be able to tell her for client confidentiality reasons, but she's going to know whether I'm doing a good job or not, because her friend is going to tell her. So, I think that kind of marketing serves a purpose if it's educational. I realize it gets people through the door, but we have a job and we need to do it.
I'm going to stick with the marketing theme. So the way that we know each other is through a group called Provisors, which Dan is also a Provisors member up here in the Pacific Northwest. So hot or not, in-person professional networking.
It's really, I think Zoom serves a purpose, but the reality is when you step, and I say that a lot, there's a reality, but when you step into a room, things are different. Like, first of all, most of my Provisor friends are at least a foot taller than me. They may not have known that if we would have stayed on Zoom. Dan, I'm pretty sure we're eye to eye right now, but I'd have to wear lifts to see you eye to eye in person. But the second piece, when people show up, I value that. I value that people will take time out of their day to get to know you. And frankly, for me, because I am relationship oriented, you get a feeling for the room and the people. I think it's a necessary ingredient to every strong relationship is being in person. Not every relationship has to be in person, but I think for what we do as advisors, that needs to be a part of it.
I think that's
So
still
you were,
struggle.
I'm sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little experience to share for this, because we're in the same Provisors group, and we have been struggling with, when you have a group of 30 people who are trying to come to an agreement on to become in person. There's a bit of the habit of being online, a bit of the loss of time and productivity of having to go someplace. But when people show up in the room, the feeling is incredibly different. And when you're looking at know, like, trust, I think that face to face, people paying attention, not multitasking, people listening, engaging in a different way, it matters. And you mentioned clients, and I think we definitely found that there was certainly some convenience to being able to do things online, but it is very much a different dynamic, even with a prospective client meeting or with an actual client meeting, on are we really communicating, because it's different. So appreciate that perspective.
Well, go ahead.
I have a follow-up for that. I think the difference is we hear about being, productivity. You can jam more things into your calendar, but are you busy or are you effective? And if showing up is the difference between making a difference in somebody's day, life, then we've hit effective. And I find that Zoom, that I can get more done on my calendar, but I didn't necessarily impact people. And showing up, when you show up in person, you nailed it, Michelle. It's like, I can't hide behind another screen. I'm not doing something else. I'm paying attention. And that's one of the greatest compliments we can give another person, is to give them our time. And if we're really going to do it, being sincere means we're really showing up. We're not doing something else at the same time.
All right. Well, that was very good, but I'm going to move on. I got something I want to, first of all, thank you, Chris, for your service. You talked about that you're still serving, so thank you. I want to know what your military service, how that has helped you, in your private practice now. What are some of the lessons learned, or maybe even some of the failures where you learned that from your military career that have helped you now?
I appreciate that. The thing that I learned, the military is fantastic because you get thrown into things. Like, it's not a choice. There's a line from, I think, the Avengers, where Captain America says, "We have orders, we should follow them." And that's exactly right. Like, I didn't choose to be a prosecutor. I didn't choose to be a defense counsel. I got a piece of paper that said I had this assignment and I was going to show up. And the greater experience is that we're attorneys. So, like, as a JAG, Judge Advocate General, you have to take your professional responsibility and apply it to the situation that you have now been tasked. So as a prosecutor, I was stationed out of Nellis Air Force Base. At the time they called it Senior Trial Counsel. And this was at the end of my active duty career. And I literally got to be in trial almost every week. And I would fly from base to base doing the most complicated cases. And what I saw was you could walk into any base, any office, and very quickly assess where they were at. Like, why did they call you in? It's usually not for a good reason. If you're there, there's some kind of problem, and you're there and you're expected to fix it in a very short amount of time. But what you get to see are people and how they show up. So what I like about my experience is that I got to read the room, and I got the experience of seeing people really try to do their absolute best with the task at hand. I also experienced the humility of, and I mean humble humility, of getting assignments that I probably wouldn't have picked, but I'm glad they happened. An assignment that I got was defending inmates at Guantanamo Bay. And it sounds like, oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. Well, for me, the backstory is one of the cases I was assigned to was a death penalty case, and it was the person accused of killing 19 sailors. Well, my dad and my brother are retired Navy folk. Man, making that conversation to my dad was so tough. But the thing that he expressed to me is like, son, we all know the job. Like, he's a Vietnam veteran. He understood. My brother Dustin is a military veteran as well. And they're just like, it's an assignment. You're expected to do your best. And that meant so much. Like, just that shared experience, but also going into hard places and doing your job. But it really does come down to the Constitution. You're like, there's something greater than myself that I am serving.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean,
You
a
bet.
family of folks who have committed so much to our country and our freedoms, and the fact that that's sort of carried forward, and you can relate to each other in that way, which I think is pretty amazing and certainly emotional. So what have you carried forward from that experience in JAG to your current practice?
To personal injury?
Yeah.
I think the first part is that I would not have been mature enough to, like, if somebody would have said like, oh, you ambulance chase or XYZ, it's funny to me because it's like one day I'm wearing a uniform and everybody thinks I'm doing something special. It's very, we're so proud of you. We have a Veterans Day. There's no personal injury lawyer day. But I'm not different.
There is a Love Your Lawyer Day, though.
I don't think personal injury made the list, but I will digress. But I appreciate that because it's like, I didn't change. Like, I'm here to work for my client, and ultimately evidence is about truth. Like, you put on truthful evidence, and especially when you have the burden of proof, you accept that responsibility and you're putting that forward ultimately for a jury to see. Like, that's the end game. It's like, we know that 99% of all plaintiffs' cases settle. So it's nice to have all of the trial experience that I got, but also it's nice to have the credibility, the personal integrity to know, like, if I'm taking a case, it's because I believe in it. I didn't change I didn't leave my integrity at the door. So when I run into somebody who's like, oh, they have a bad taste in their mouth for one reason or another, I'm like, okay, well, hold my coffee. Let's have a conversation about this. And that's probably one of the best things I can do, is to have that conversation. For my clients, I do think the trial experience, like, I wouldn't have gotten that opportunity in personal injury. Like, it's very hard to get into trial. Frankly, one of the tort reform comments that went around is like, there's too many lawsuits. Well, that's not true. There are not enough lawsuits. And if it's not a good lawsuit, it ends somewhere. But more importantly, we need more jury trials. The point of having a trial is that you bring your community forward, and they're making the decision. The community is making the decision about what is important. And when they make their voice heard, that means that they are putting the community standard forward. It's not something to legislate away.
Well, what we can't legislate away is talking about our great corporate sponsors. We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back with our guest, Chris Cazares, for our Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to put his wife, Devin, on the stand. We're going to see how that turns out. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. And Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors, Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, the Kitsap Newspaper Group, BC Fitness Studio, and Upstart Group. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now, back to the show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm co-host Michelle Bomberger, here with Dan Whedon, and our guest today is Chris Cazares. For our next segment, let's kick off Plead the Fifth.
So Plead the Fifth, we're going to turn up the heat a little bit on you. We're really putting you under the interrogation, and you can plead the fifth once and only once. And if you plead the fifth, that really opens it up for Michelle and I, and you probably should be more concerned about Michelle than me is what I'm thinking. But look, you brought this up, Chris. You brought up Devin, and so I'm going to put her on the stand, and let's say she can't plead the fifth. And I skillfully ask her if Chris could improve on anything around his work, either in leadership in the practice or in entrepreneurship in the practice, or even his duties at home. What would she say?
She definitely wouldn't say do more dishes because that's my job.
Okay.
Something leadership wise, I could definitely improve on that. She just takes the mantle. She runs very organized meetings, and she's so dedicated in moving the ball forward for our office, our staff, and our clients every single day. And for me, I will drill down on certain things and get lost in those details. So I feel like she watches my six in ways that like require real trust. And I think that's something for me, back to her, I should probably do a better job. So thanks for bringing that up, Dan.
All right, so plead the fifth. If you weren't practicing personal injury law, what type of law would you practice?
I don't know if I would practice law. I think before I did this, I was a football coach. I was a teacher. I enjoyed being an officer. Like I have been learning to become a therapist as well. I feel like my job is very specific. My personality, it's like I help people. And this is when I went to law school, I was surprised. I was like, oh wow, everybody's not here for the same thing. I thought I was going to like Hogwarts and I was going to get put in the helper section, like, oh yeah, we're here to help. It's like I'm almost a glorified social worker sometimes. And I like that. I like being in that role. But I think law school can do a better job of helping people find what it is that they're passionate about. And personal injury, it's like, it's the comeback story. It's so cool to jump into somebody's like hero's journey where something that they didn't ask for has happened to them and they have to overcome it. There's nothing like it, and you get to observe it and help them along the way. So I don't know. I'd probably retire. Thanks, Michelle.
Well, I'm not gonna let you retire. I'm coming to you with your next assignment. Since you said you follow orders, I'm coming with you with your next orders. You no longer can practice law. You have to start, Chris, a business based on a hobby. Plead the fifth. What would that hobby and business be?
I would provide therapy to soldiers and sailors, airmen who have been affected by PTSD. From trauma, and other people in our community. Probably like I'm really heavy. I love the 12-step program. So right there, I'd be a therapist.
That sounds like you're already going down that path.
Yeah.
You're already taking steps down that path.
Yeah, that's true. I am.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I like to emphasize, there's counselor of law. I emphasize counselor. There we are.
Yeah. Actually, we do the same thing. There's a lot more of the advisor and the counselor in this role than people think about. People think about lawyers again, it's law and order, right? You show up in court, you draft documents, and a lot more of it is the advisory and the counselor piece of it. So
That's right.
Who has been the biggest influence in your career choices or in your life?
For sure, God. That's always an answered prayer. And on this earth, person, I mean, now it's Devin for sure. Like, she's so good about making sure. I mean, we wouldn't live in Washington State. We wouldn't have come into this personal injury practice. Like, she having a fantastic partner in life and in business is probably the best ride you'll ever get.
I love that. I wish we could stay on longer and dig deeper because I feel like we've only touched the surface of all things that are Chris. So thank you so much for joining us today on the show. For folks who want to get in touch with you or learn more about Polaris or how to pronounce your last name, could you please let them know how to reach you?
You bet, Chris Cazares. But in the Pacific North, we do say Cazares. Like,
I thought I was doing, because I'm half Hispanic, so I thought I was doing the Cazares correctly.
You know what? And maybe Spain. It's all geography, just like our tacos.
It's a Texas thing, isn't it?
It's very different. Yeah, I'm from El Paso, so very different. But yeah, if you want to get a hold of us, it is polarisinjurylaw.com, or you can reach me at Chris at polarisinjurylaw.com.
And for our listeners, make sure to check out all the replays at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle or wherever you get your podcast, Google, iHeart, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and be sure to follow us on our social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
Well, Chris, thank you for having joined us. I will work diligently on making sure that I say your last name correctly, and maybe we can get together in person sometime over a cup of coffee or something. So thank you for having joined us. Learned a lot, and hopefully we'll have you on in the future. Michelle, as always, great to see you. Happy Thanksgiving to both of you and your families. Everyone, our next show will be on Wednesday, December 7th, which means we're taking next week off. It's a fifth week of the month. It's post-holiday, so we're taking 2 weeks off. Our next show will be Wednesday, December 7th, and our guest will be Carol Bowser from Conflict Management Strategies. My co-host that week will be Craig Swanson. In the meantime, everyone, please be safe, be well, and be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.